In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to implement the login workflow for the React application authenticating to a Spring Boot API. In the previous tutorial, we implemented the register workflow. So if you have the registration form like what we have, I can actually enter the user details and actually register a new user. So let's try. So you can see the registration workflow works perfectly well. So you have this user created, but now we don't have a login workflow. So the step-by-step is also provided right here in my website. And if you also want to understand how the architecture looks like, I think you can find this somewhere in this previous post I have. You can have the diagram here, which is actually very, very clear and easy to understand. So where we currently have gotten to, let me just expand it. So currently we've gotten to from registration to register to the success page. This is where we are. This is number 3. So now we are going to continue with the login form. That is what we are going to be doing right now. I'd like to remind you to subscribe to my channel if you've not subscribed so that you don't miss any update from me. Okay, so let's take the step-by-step to create the login workflow. It requires us to make some changes in the Spring Boot application and also make some changes in the React application. So let's start from the Spring Boot side. The first thing we want to do is to create the login request class. So I've started creating it. This login request class, you need to create it. So this login request class contains just 3 fields: the ID, the username, and the password. And of course, I'm going to just add the entity annotation here. And I think I'm going to just remove this. So entity annotation gives you everything. And I need to add the generated value, and strategy is going to be the generation type.identity. So this is the first thing you want to do. You need to create this class. So this is the class that will hold the login request. The data coming from the login request is going to be held in this class. So the next thing we want to do is we want to update the user class. So the user class already have the first name, last name, username, and password, but we want to add one more field, and that field is going to be a string field. It's going to hold the password hash. So the password hash is like the encoded password because we are going to be using the user entered password to compare with the password hash and also compare the username as well. So you need to add the password hash, not the pass hash, but the password hash here. Okay, so I'm going to save everything. And the next thing we want to do is we want to now create the authenticate method. So the authenticate method is the method that is going to take the username and the password and authenticate to actually verify if the username and password is valid. We are going to be creating the authenticate method in the user service right here. So we are going to create this method right here. So it's going to simply take the username and password or the login request, and it's going to validate that user. So it's going to return a true or false. True for when the user is valid, and false or an exception for invalid login request. So it's going to be Boolean, and it's going to be authenticate. And it's going to take string username and string password. So the first thing that is going to happen is going to retrieve the user from the database is equal to user repository .find by username, and you specify the username. Now we are going to check if the user is null. If the user does not exist, for sure we have to terminate this flow. So we are going to say if dot user .get username is not equal to the incoming username, then we are going to terminate the flow. We are going to throw an exception that says username not found, and we specify the text user not found in database. Okay, so why do we, okay, it's going to be a new exception. Okay, so assuming the user exists, we are going to also check whether the password is correct. So I'm going to say if the password is equal to the password hash. So if the incoming password encoded is equal to the password hash. So I'm going to say if user.getPassword, actually get password hash, is equal to the password, incoming password encoded. So it's going to be, we're going to encode the password. So if this is not, let's see, actually password encoder dot encode. So if this is not the case, So if this is not the case, so it's going to be if not user.get password hash. If it is not equal to the encoded password, then we're also going to throw a new exception, and this exception is going to be about the same. This time is going to be bad credentials exception that says the password is incorrect. The password is incorrect. Otherwise, if all these checks goes true, we are simply going to return true. So this is basically the authenticate function right here. You need to write it, and this is the first thing you need to do in the user service. Now, in the user controller, we now want to write the /login endpoint. So if we go to the user controller, we want to write one controller method which actually is taking the /endpoint. So it's going to be post, because it will be having a post request coming in to /login, and this post request will contain the username and the password in the request body. So let's write this function. Is going to be a public function. We are going to return a response entity. A response entity is going to return a string, and the name of this function is going to be login. At request body, the request body is going to contain now the login request, and also we will be storing this data in the session. Although we are not going to be handling session in Spring Boot because we are going to be managing the authentication, we are focusing on React. But let's also use the best practice, and we can save this incoming user data login request in a session. So HTTP session, and we are going to try. So we are now going to check if this user is authenticated. So I'm going to say boolean is authenticated is equal to authentication service. Is here user service authenticate? So it already understands what I want to do. Login request dot get. We don't have getters and setters. So I'm going to just put a data annotation here, so we can have the getters and setters exposed. So let's go back to the controller. So it's going to be, let's see, login request dot get username, and the second parameter is going to be login request dot get password. Okay, so that's fine. So we are going to say if it's authenticated. What we are going to do, if the user is authenticated, we are going to add the user details to the session. So I'm going to just add a session attribute. The attribute is going to simply be user, and we are going to simply add the username login request dot get username. I'm going to add the username to the session, because you may want to display the section somewhere, maybe in the header or in the user profile. So, and we are going to return a response entity, response entity dot okay. So this will be having a status code of 200. Okay, login was successful. Otherwise, if this is not the case, so it's going to be else. We are going to return a failure. So it's going to be also a response entity this time. Status, and it's going to be an unauthorized status. So it's going to be HTTP status dot unauthorized, and the body of this is going to be with a message that says invalid username or password. So of course the whole code is right there in my GitHub repository, so you can actually copy if you want, just to check if you have any problem. If any exception occurs, so we are going to catch the exception. So it's going to catch exception. We're also going to throw return a response entity. A response entity, instead of throwing an exception, is going to be internal server error, and then it's going to be an error occurred. So this is basically the controller method. So once a request comes in here, we are going to authenticate and see if it's authenticated. We are going to return an OK response. Otherwise, we are going to return unauthorized. But if there's a failure that occurs, we are going to return an unknown error. So the next thing we want to do is to now go to React and create the React component for user login. Although we can actually go ahead to test this, but we can also go to create a React component. So let's go to React, So we are going to create one component is going to be the login component. We are going to call it login.js. Now this is going to be a functional component, so I'm going to say RFC. The markup for this form is going to have username, password, and a submit. Now I've already written this somewhere, so let me just show you. If you have my website open, you have the markup for this component right here. So click and just copy this container and just use it there. So copy it and then use it. Instead of returning a div, just return this container you copied from my website. Okay. So again, we also want to import the typography and all the other components like box and containers. So those we have it already here. So I'm just going to copy this import from a registration page. I'm going to just copy the import section and I'm going to use it in the login component. Okay, so we have our login component. Now we are going to go ahead to create the login route so that we can actually see how this login page looks like. So I'm going to go to the base component, which is the app.js. We are now going to create the login route, and actually two of them, the login and also the login success. So I'm going to copy these two and paste them here and just rename this to login, and this is going to be login success. And the element for this one is going to be login. Do we have login success? No, so let me go ahead to create it quickly. And it's going to be a functional component as well. So I'm going to just say file, table. So let's go back to complete creating the route. Login is fine, but login success. So let's correct this. Login success is going to be this one. Okay, so we have the two routes. Permit me to borrow some data from the registration success page. So I'm going to just copy the container and I'm going to use it in the login success. Login success, I'm going to replace this and I'm going to say you have successfully logged in, right? So here I'm going to say go home. Remember that when we have the registration page, success page, it's have to redirect us to the login. So I'm going to just have the login right here in the registration success page. Let's save everything. Just make sure we don't have any errors. We have some errors coming from the login success. From the login success, okay, we have some errors. So let's go copy this, the import section, and we are going to use it in the login success. Okay, so save everything. Oh yeah, okay, great. In the login page, we have to write a few logic to actually handle the user login. So let's go to the login. I'm going to close orders. So we are going to need a couple of things: the state to handle the user login and to hold the user data, and also to submit the data to the login endpoint. So we need a number of things. First, we will need to have some states. And one of these states is going to be the username and the password. So I'm going to create them. Const. The first one is the username. Username and set username. And this is going to be use states, and initial value is going to be empty string. And I'm going to replicate the same thing for the password. So I'm going to copy this and paste. In this case, it's going to be password and set password. Okay. We also need the state to hold an error message that may occur. So I'm going to create a state to hold the error message. Const error and set error is going to be use state. It's going to be empty string. And finally, we need navigate, because when we have a successful login, we navigate to the login success page. So this const navigate. We also have the use navigate hook. Now we have all of this. We are now going to write the function to handle the login. Okay, so let's write the function to handle login. So we are going to call this function handle login, and it's going to be an async function because it's going to be making an API call. The async function is going to take the event, that is a form that raised this event, Okay, so what we are going to do first, we want to prevent it from the default behavior so that it doesn't submit. We want to do some checks before we submit the data. So prevent default. We want to set the error to be empty for now. So we want to now create the initial value for the login data. So I'm going to say const login data is equal to about the actual login data. So the password, this state you see here, they hold the actual value of the login data. They contain the actual values from the text field. We're now going to try to make the API call. So I'm going to do const the response. We are going to be using Axios. Listen equals Axios the post, and it's going to go to HTTP localhost at port 8080, and it's going to be login. And the second parameter to this is going to be the login data. So I'm going to just add the second parameter to be the login data. We are going to say if response is okay, if response dot okay, right? If response dot okay, in this case the response was successful. In this situation, we are going to navigate to the /login success. Okay, so this case is a case of the response was successful, else we are going to display an error message. So I'm going to create a new error data. So there is going to be error message coming from the response, or coming from the API call, or the API response.json. So there is going to be the error response coming back, and we are going to set the error to be the error data.message if that's available, or it's going to be login failed for user. Please retry. Okay, so this within our catch block, but outside the catch block, if something else occurs, we don't know. So we are going to also catch that error as well. And in this case, we are going to set the error to an error occurred. Please retry. Okay, so this is basically it. Let's see if we are missing out anything. I'm going to save everything for now. Before we run the React workflow, let's try to take a look at our components. So let's try to go to login. We have the login form displayed correctly. Let's try login success. Let me just make sure my forms are displayed. You have successfully logged in. Okay, go home. Oh, go home does not. Let's go to link, go home to the products page. So in our login success, we need to link, go home to the products page. So it's going to be /products. Is /products or /products? Let's check /products. Now I'm going to save everything. Before I run it in React, I'm going to try to use Postman to check whether the API actually works correctly. And to do that, we are going to go to the Spring Boot application, and we are going to restart the Spring Boot application, and we are going to try to do an API call to the Spring Boot to /login endpoint and see what we get from there. Okay, so it says Tomcat started on port 8080. So let's go to, okay, so I'm going to try to log in using Postman, and let's see if we have a successful login. Then we can now go to login from the React login form. So I'm going to start a new request, HTTP. First, let me go to the products endpoint. So let's try to get all the products and see what we have. We don't have, because we need to specify the authorization header. So in this, it's going to be basic auth, and the username and password is the same. So I'm going to send. So we have the product list coming. Okay, so let's try to now log in and let's see what we have. This time it's going to be a post request going to login, and we are not going to specify any auth. So okay, clear the response. I just have to clear it. So we are making a post request to /login, and we are not specifying any authentication header. I'm going to click on send. It tells us unauthorized. Let's see, let me go to authorization. No auth, this is correct. Oh, we need to specify a body. Okay, so we need to specify the body. The body is going to be raw, and it's going to be JSON right here. And I think I have it on my clipboard. We are going to send the username and the password. And let's send the request now. And you can see login was successful. It is 200. Okay. Let's now go to do the same thing from the React form. So let's go to the React UI, and this time we are going to go to the /login right here. And I'm going to specify the username and the password 2424. And it says an error occurred. Let's take a look at the console to see what is there. And I'm going to also go back to React to check. So if response.ok, let's see what response comes here. So I'm going to say console.log, and let's look at the response that comes. I'm going to save everything, and let's go back to the UI to check what is there. So I'm going to click on login, and it says, oh, so the login is actually successful, but there's no response.ok. So let's check for the response.status of 200. So let's go back to, instead of saying response.ok, I'm going to say response.status equal to 200. I think that should be fine. So I'm going to save everything, and I think it should work now. Let's go back to try. So I think it should work. So everything is the same, login, and you can see that you have successfully logged in. So this is basically how the login workflow works between React and Spring Boot. But there are other questions we might be asking. For instance, how do we then save this login details and be able to log in subsequent requests? By the way, I can just click on go home to go back to the products page. And how do we also log out a user? We've not talked about this. How do we display this text conditionally based on the user that is logged in as well? So let's work on all those in the next tutorial. If you have other questions or any other thing you want to also include in what we need to cover, please also write it out there in the comment box of this video, below this video, and I'm going to respond to you. I'd like to stop here. Thank you very much for viewing, and we see you in the next part.